Now, without further delay, I'd like to turn today's call over to your first speaker, Chuck Tomasi. Chuck, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Marvin, and thank you, everybody, for joining us. This is very exciting. Welcome to TechNow, the web series for ServiceNow administrators and developers. I've got a new control panel in front of us, as you can see. My name is Chuck Tomasi. If you haven't met me before, I am a senior TPMM at ServiceNow. I've got a whole bunch of experience. Won't get into that today. That could be an episode among itself. And I was a customer for a couple of years before coming to ServiceNow, and my focus has really been around custom applications, integrations, and the platform in general. You can also find me on Live Coding Happy Hour and in the community, both on the community live stream, another series that I do Monday through Fridays. I encourage you to watch that if you're interested. And hope to see you at Knowledge, which we will get to in just a little bit. I'd also like to introduce another speaker that we have today, Kreg Steppe.
Hello, everybody. I was going to say my name, but you just did. My name is Kreg Steppe. I'm a senior curriculum developer at ServiceNow. I work in our training and certifications team, and I specialize in cloud automation. So when you go to like Knowledge, which we're going to talk about in a moment, all those virtual machines that you use to participate in your labs, or if you take any training at ServiceNow, a lot of that is my doing behind. I'm the man behind the curtain that makes all that happen, along with the whole team that builds the curriculum. Don't get me wrong. So I've been in ServiceNow since 2014, so I'm here for 4 years with a background in orchestration at ServiceNow, and this will be my 4th Knowledge conference coming up.
I think this is, your anniversary was around here somewhere in April, was it not?
The beginning of April, that's right.
All right, you're what we call fully vested. Congratulations.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, sir.
And our 3rd musketeer.
Yes, I'm Dave Slusher. I'm a developer advocate for the Platform Business Unit, and I'm responsible for creating content for developers. And so you see some of that around some of the places Chuck has mentioned at developer.servicenow.com. That's where we have our blog and training courses and information to help you get productive in ServiceNow development. I've got, I came to ServiceNow, after a pretty reasonable career as a full-stack developer. So kind of working on the ServiceNow platform is kind of a different, it was a whole gear shift in career. Been here since 2013, been on the show for 2.5 years. Everyone on this call is an early podcaster, and I'm talking to you from a room so full of comic books that it is downright embarrassing. There you go.
All right, we'll get back to Dave in just a moment because he's got the bulk of the content today. Before we do that, I want to remind you, Knowledge 18 is, about 10 days away, guys? It's really, really close, May 7th through 10th at the Las Vegas. At the Venetian, we want to see you there. It's not too late to sign up. And the content catalog, your agenda builder, is live. So go, please, I encourage you, if you've already registered, go and build your agenda now because those sessions are filling up, and some of them have already filled up, which is actually a good thing because that tells us we need to do a repeat, and we do have slots available. We're finding out what the popular ones are and where we can slot those in. But if you see something that's full, come back in a day or so and check and see if it's available as a repeat so you can get into that. Really, really encourage you. Lots of great hands-on labs, lots of breakout sessions. A good chunk of those breakout sessions are done by our customers. So it's not just ServiceNow offering you solutions to your business problems. You actually get the stories, the journeys, the dialogue from your peers, your customers, our customers, your peers directly. It's a wonderful, wonderful conference. You will learn, you will gain, bring your business cards, you will network. It is the event of the year, and we will very, very much look forward to seeing you there. If you are a developer and admin, many of you that are listening to this content and watching this content are in that vein. If you're a developer, architect, admin, check the checkbox that says CreatorCon. I want to remind you, this is the deeper dive technical stuff because, well, if you go to a standard knowledge session on, say, Service Portal, you'll be dragging and dropping widgets onto a page. But if you go to the CreatorCon Service Portal widget sessions, you will be building the Service Portal widgets and doing JavaScript and AngularJS and all that stuff that makes a Service Portal widget go. So there's a deeper dive into scripting, REST APIs, IoT, lots of great stuff for the developers and admins and architects. Check that checkbox. If you don't check it, you're not going to be entitled to go to those sessions. As we said earlier, I think Dave and Kreg and I will be doing 3 live TechNow sessions, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday in the Developer Theater in the Developer Hub, which is in that main expo hall. Come find us. We'd love to shake hands and meet you in person. And you could say, hey, I saw your session on REST APIs. That was pretty cool. All right. This is my turn to do a quick demo for you. I want to cover a topic that I ran into while I was doing the implementation for a customer. Actually, while I was a customer, years and years ago, back in the dinosaur age, I had to do a multi-language implementation. And it's pretty easy when you do the choice lists and whatnot that you put in the different language settings and you can translate the field labels. But what do you do about those messages that are in a script? What do you do depends whether it's a server-side script or a client-side script, but the method is pretty much the same. I'm going to break those down and show you a quick demo real quick. If it's a server-side script, you use the method GSGetMessage. This goes into the messages table and retrieves the right language translation for the message you want to display. And you can see here, what is it, line 24 on your screen, it says GS.getMessage, which is embedded into an add info message. You can do that because the return is a string. And it says number of digits cannot be greater than 15. Well, there is a line, there's a record in the messages table that says if you want it in English, say this. If you want it in German, say this. And it's based off of a key, and the key is whatever message you pass in GSGetMessage. You can see another one a little bit down below that actually has a parameter in it, the table and then curly brace 0. I'll show you how that works in just a second. Client scripts are pretty much the same, but you don't have a GS. You don't have an applied system class available to you, so you call the GetMessage function, and I urge you to note the messages field at the top of the screen. It is a comma-separated list of the keys that you will use. And this is helpful because it retrieves the translations before it sends the content to the browser. Because the browser just understands HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. We send all that to the browser if you specify those messages that you're going to need. If I left them out, we'd get to this point and the server's going to say, wait a minute, I don't have a translation for that, and make a server call and possibly slow things down. So we could front-end load, if you will, those things in client scripts if you use that messages field properly. The messages table is pretty standard. As I mentioned, there's a key that has the message in it. And you can see this one from the other example. And in this case, I've got English and Spanish translations for that. And that's what's in the message field of the message record. Kind of redundant. I know it sounds kind of crazy, but you're really basing off the key. If you're familiar with choice lists, it's very similar to the value and the label. So the message is the label that I'm going to present to the user based on their language settings, and the key is what is it that I actually need out of that. So let me jump to a real quick demo. We're going to do the screen share thing here. Get this going. You might even
I like that slide.
Behind the
coming soon.
Isn't that a nice one? It's like a sunrise. Yeah. It's a beautiful day. Okay, and I am going to, you'll see my screen, right? Someone's watching the attendee version. Excellent. I have made a very simple beer application. Think of this as kind of like Untapped, one of those apps where you check in when you drink a beer. So you can see I've got the double quote beer from Two Geeks Brewery. It's a stout. And anytime I rate something above a 4, I'm going to just display a message on the screen. For example, let's take the REST IPA, which is really hard to say when you use the same REST API. Yeah. and change this to a 4.25. And if I save that record, you can see that it says, that is a good beer. And it's displaying the name of the record, which comes from the record. Now, in Studio, I did this with a business rule. I just called the business rule delicious. Okay. And the way we would normally do that is with a script that says, add info message, current get display value plus, that is a good beer. The problem is my app wants to go to Germany or Portugal or Sweden. We need a translation. This message will always come up in English, which is a bit of a pain in the backside when it comes to translating. So let's comment out the legacy one for a bit and quickly put in the code that makes this translatable. The key to this is GSGetMessage, as I showed in the slide earlier. And my key, I do something different. Rather than passing in a English parameter version that you saw, I could very well say curly brace 0 is something like this. I'll put it in comment. 4 M's, I think. That's a good beer. Well, the problem is I have an apostrophe in here, which throws this off. Yeah, you could use double quotes and whatnot, but I'm not going to get into that. My challenge is there's no entry in the messages record to translate. So later when you get a new language, you say, give me all the English ones. What I want to do is say, give me all the English keys and translate those into Japanese, okay, if we're going to be drinking beer in Japan. So it gives you a reference to which to base those translations from, rather than, oh my, I better go through all the scripts and see where I'm using GSGetMessage. That's not an effective way to do your translations. We do have future show planned on doing translations, but this is a way to set up your script to be translatable. It will work perfectly fine in English. So I've got this key here that looks terrible. If I saw this on the screen, I would immediately know I'm missing a key. So easy to debug. What the key looks like, and I can do this in Studio, is this record over here. It's a message record that I showed before. The key says, TechNow 49 Quick Tip, good beer. Curly brace 0, that's good beer. Okay. I also have one for Spanish. Esa es una buena cerveza, I think. Google Translate is only so accurate. Okay. With this, my parameter 0 comes from this comma, and I've got a blog article that discusses this, of how you can pass this. It's an array. Oftentimes, if people have one parameter, they don't put it in an array. They just pass it and go, here, take that. But I like to pass it as an array with with square brackets. Then, now that I've got my message translated out of there, I just do an add info message on whatever that string was. And if I save this, real quick demo, let's hope I can drive in Spanish. I am going to go to my language picker. Well, first let's verify that it still works. I did save that, right? Yes, I saved it. There's no more blue dot on that tab in Studio. Let's take another beer from the list. I want to make sure I save Dave some time. We'll take the return null from the Glide Record Brewery. And somebody rated it as 3.14, thinking that's funny. They were drinking beer, not eating pie. And I really like the return null. Let's save that, make sure it still works in English. Return null, which scared me the first time I saw this. I went, something didn't work. It looks like an error message. That's a terrible name for a beer. When it comes to displaying error messages, I got caught off guard. Let me then go and change my language from English to Spanish. And you'll notice a bunch of things get translated. And in my TN49 menu, whoops, not there, TN49 menu, I have my beers. Yes, let's leave that because I typed in the wrong field. And I have we'll take the undeclared variable. And I even translated the choice list just for this demo, just to have fun. And it's already 4.25, but you know what? If we make it a 4.26, it's still going to say, hey, that's greater than 4.0. And I know that from my years of using ServiceNow that the first option is save. And it says undeclared variable, which is another terrible name for them when you want to display it on a message. It frightens me at first. But it says, esa es una buena cerveza, which is correctly translated. My business rule is now doing the lookup on that message. And if I have to come up with another language, all I have to do is another language here, a record like this, change it to German or whatever plugins I've got turned on, and translate the message down here. It makes it very easy to go to the next incremental language. Or if I've got 15 languages, I can get the key, do the translation, get it in a spreadsheet, import the spreadsheet, make it an easy import, and I'm all done. So that is, keep your eye out. If you are hard coding anything in a script today, whether it's an error message or an info message, or I don't know if I can go so bold as debug messages, but keep in mind, I may have to do this. You don't know what your organization has in mind. You go, oh, we're just one language right now. That's all we need. You may be doing an acquisition in 6 months the CEO hasn't told you about yet. Get ready. this is a way to safeguard yourself against that. And you can just go, yeah, I'll have those translations for you tomorrow. Done.
Hey, Chuck, I do have a question for you.
Yes.
And someone had asked, does a comma in the key cause any issues?
No, it's all text. That's a valid question. Very good question. They're talking about where it says, yeah, and I've got that extra comma there. That's not a problem. I can also put quotes where I had it in English. It says that. Now, I changed this one, but I could say, that's good beer. It just pulls it in as one single string. Very easy to do. So excellent question. All right, I am going to stop sharing and turn it.
It's probably best to kind of avoid it if you can, because I think it will get a little confusing. It could get confusing.
It might. It depends on, you might have style guides at your organization that, say don't use contractions, or, avoid using the word never, that kind of thing that some people do. That's completely up to you. And if your organization has that in place, please follow it.
Yeah, there's definitely like the trade-off there of whether you use that readable versus unreadable key. Like the trade-off is, if you use the readable text, you don't actually create the message, you see it. It will be there. But I personally kind of prefer the other approach, right? I prefer that kind of, coming from the Java world, I like that hierarchical Usenet style message. Where I want to have the leftmost thing to be the broad holder, and then they get more specific to the right, and you get down to the exact message for precisely that reason. Is if you have an untranslated message, you want to make sure that you have the translation records.
Right, and I will be making this available on my GitHub repo. The application is out there if you want to take it and play around with it and substitute your own keys in there. It's a very simple application, 2 tables. You're welcome to take a look. We've got I believe we got a link in the resource pool, the GitHub Chuck Tomasi TN49QT repo. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Dave, and he's going to educate us all on REST API Explorer.
Yeah, thank you, Chuck. So what we're going to do today, and we're actually going to do a few of these over the near future, is we're going to talk about some of the capabilities that exist in the platform that people out in the world, I think people kind of underuse a little bit. They may not realize that they're there. I know, part of my job function is I go out and I speak at developer meetups, and I always find it a little bit shocking, like how few people use the script debugger and things like these tools in their day-to-day life. I kind of frequently take straw polls, and who uses this and who uses this. And so what we're going back is basically like just to make people aware of some of the capabilities that exist in the platform. And so REST API Explorer is an extremely powerful tool, and it can really help you be more productive as you're doing integration work. So really quick overview of the REST APIs on ServiceNow. So what we're talking about is not consuming a REST API that exists elsewhere. We're talking about exposing a REST API where the endpoint lives on your ServiceNow instance. So if you have one of those endpoints, it's really composed of 4 big pieces: the namespace, aka the scope, the actual API you have, the version of the API, and then the exact resource that you're hitting. And so when you combine all these things together, you will see them represented in the URL, which I will show you on the next slide. So an example of one of your built-in APIs that exists on your out-of-the-box instance is the table API. And it is quite common that people do some integrations with that. You may have a service portal widget or some sort of integration that's doing that, or you may have a script like that's inserting a record into your instance, from wherever. And table API exists specifically for this. And the namespace is now, and the API is the table API. And the version that the highest version that's out there now is V2. And one of the resources is the standard retrieve records from a table, this list records from a given table. And you'll see that ends up being the URL represented on the screen with the get verb in HTTP. And you'll see that you've got the table name there is a path parameter, which we'll talk about on the next slide. These resources can have path parameters like we just had, which is a very common API style, where one of the pieces in the URL that you're addressing somehow it is a component. It basically is a variable parameter that you're passing to that. And your APIs can also have query parameters, so everything to the right of the question mark. And you'll see a list of standard ones in Table API, where you can specify queries and the views and things like that, limits. These can be predefined, so we have a bunch of the ones in here that are predefined. They can kind of be arbitrary, and you'll see that in some of these examples. So that's kind of the lightning overview of what exists already in the endpoints. Now, REST API Explorer is a built-in tool for accessing these APIs on your instance. Now, bear in mind, again, what we're talking about is your own instance. So because REST API Explorer lives on your instance and the endpoint also does, the REST API Explorer actually is able to do some introspection, and it has a higher level of knowledge of what's happening on that API. REST API Explorer is not a general purpose API tool, like Postman or some other ones that we'll discuss at the end. They only address your own instance. And when you get into REST API Explorer, you can generate requests on all the verbs, right? You can do a GET request, POST, PUT, PATCH, DELETE. The reason a lot of these tools exist, right, a GET request is extremely easy to generate. You know, they're basically trivial, right? You can do that in the error bar of any browser. But all the other four verbs are not easy to generate, and that's why you need some kind of tool. If you're going to be manually exercising an API, you need something to do it. And the REST API Explorer is actually an extremely good tool for using against your own instance. So as you can see, when you get the interface, you're presented basically with this leftmost view. It's very much like the architectural list that I gave you before, in basically the same order, right? You pick the namespace that you're exploring. In this case, we're looking at the now namespace. We're looking at the table API. You can pick the version specifically. Right there, it's got set to latest, or you can, if you wanted to, you could address an earlier version. And then you've got the list of the resources. And again, because REST API Explorer is on there, it knows this list of resources. So it's able to tell you every one of these that exists on there, and you can select amongst it. When you do, you'll notice that it shows you exactly what that URL that represents that resource, what it looks like. So it'll show it in that screen. You'll also get the verb. So in this case, we've got a get resource selected, but it could have been one of the puts or patches or something like that. And you'll also notice that then we've got a set of parameters. And when we go to the demo, I'll point out the difference between the ones that are free text versus the ones that are a choice list, like that table name. And as I said, the REST API Explorer is usable with any API endpoint that you have on your system. So this includes the provided APIs, so your table API, your aggregate API, the ones that are delivered out of box. However, this also includes scripted REST APIs. So this is when it begins to get really powerful, is that if you're developing an API that you are going to expose an endpoint to somebody else, to other systems, then that allows you to exercise your own API more or less as a user. And even with your own API that you're building, the API Explorer is smart enough to know which resources have been defined, and it gives you that list like you see before. So this could be for any ad hoc API that you yourself have created. When you're using REST API Explorer, you have full control of the request. So you're picking the endpoint. You've already kind of done that when you get to this point. But you also have the ability to control the parameters. So in anything that takes a payload, which is basically the three middle verbs, the put, patch, and post, then you can basically specify the format that your payload is coming in as. It's one of these things where we're kind of at the tipping point where, I'm old enough that for most of my career, XML was everything that everyone did. Honestly, at this point, XML is kind of like the outlier. I cannot remember the last time I did an XML post to anything. Like JSON has more or less slowly eaten the world, and it's like everything that we do.
I'd agree with that as well, Dave.
Although you may very well have some kind of legacy system that that predates kind of the modern the modern approach of JSON. And you may have an appliance in your system or a legacy system that's 10 years old or 5 years old and is posts those XML payloads. So you can exercise both of these, both on the inside and the outside, right? You can receive your response in either format, and you can send it in either format. And you get full insight into that response. So we'll see this in the demo phase. You can look at every single header that is sent in your request. You can look at every single header sent in the response. You can you can look at the status code that's returned, the response body, and you can kind of drill down in that format that you specified. And with that, I'm going to click over to the demo. And while I'm doing that, if there's any questions, we can raise them during the time.
Yeah, I've got a few. I think Chuck had a couple as well.
Yeah, go ahead.
One guy asked, which I think it's pretty obvious it will, but will the version default to the latest version if you don't specify that as part of your URI?
Yes, it will. If you just open this, which I'm going to do right now. So this is a testable hypothesis. So let's go ahead and hit that. I'm going to open the REST API Explorer by standard kind of navigation means. And when you do, you'll see the default one that it popped up was now. This was the last one I used, and it did table API. But let's pick a different one. Let's just pick email API. And oh, interesting. It did actually. Oh, it popped to V1 because there's only one. I think this aggregate API. I think it has two. Yeah. So if by default, it will go to default to the latest. Actually, you know what? This might be a setting actually in the API. Now that I think about it. So
yeah, I think you set the default, don't you? Like when you set a new version. I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, I think you can say you can give it an. It may actually be that what you're seeing there is not. It's not an API default. It's not the API Explorer default. It's probably the API default. But that is actually an interesting question to verify. So take that as a note to look that up. But I think that you do specify that in an API. If you want the latest or a specific one to be the default or something like that. So what we see here is, again, this is the API Explorer. You can pick the various namespaces that are on there on your system. What I'm going to use actually is the aggregate API to show the usage of how you can use this to drive it around. And you guys tell me, are we at the right zoom level here? It's a little bit cut off, but I think that's probably. I don't want to make it too small.
That looks good.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do is we're going to use the aggregate API in our favorite demo table, the one I always use because it's kind of the lingua franca of ServiceNow, is the one everybody knows and sees and understands. So we're going to look at incident, and what we're going to do is we're just going to get some statistical analysis of the incident table on this instance. And so this is my personal developer instance. It doesn't have a huge amount of data like most of your out-of-the-box instances. But what we're going to do is in API Explorer, it now knows that this API takes a table. And I've picked incident. So it now, because it's closely tied with the instance that it's living on, it now actually does know, it has information about what's available to it. So I'm going to go ahead and click this average fields icon here. And you'll notice that it actually shows me the fields that are available on that table. And so it's not showing me necessarily ones that are numeric. It's actually showing me everything. So it's not quite smart enough to know which ones are the correct type, but it does understand some information about it. It knows what's available there and what we can do. So I'm going to add a few of these over here via the slush bucket, standard thing. And you'll notice what they end up doing is that turns into this comma-separated list, which is basically the column name underneath it. So what we're getting here is we're getting basically the label view in the slush bucket, and then we get the column view when this control converts over. So you don't actually have to know what the underlying column name is as you're doing this, which can be helpful. If it's one of those things that you would have to go look up what the column is actually named. And let me pick one more, and this one I'm just going to type it straight in because it's duration. So at this point, we're now passing it a couple parameters via the REST API Explorer. So we're telling it, do a get, and the aggregate API only has a single resource, which is get stats, right? So we're saying on this instance, in this API, which is in the namespace now, give me the stats resource with the table name parameter. We've picked incident, and now we're giving it these query parameters. Okay, that's setting the stage. We'll request format is JSON, which is a no op on here because we're not actually sending a payload. It's a get resource, and the response format is JSON. You can, if you wanted to, add arbitrary headers here. So you could put any header foo equals bar in here if you wanted. So at this point, we're going to click send. And what happens is, oh my goodness. Oh, you know what I did? I did a wrong thing. I thought I was doing something. I was beating the system there, and I didn't. All right, let's do that. So let's go ahead and send it again. And you get the 200 OK. And so you'll notice as you look at this, you're actually getting a lot of information about the request that you just sent. So you'll see I did a get action against this. And this is the entire URL as represented once you add all those parameters. So you see all the reassignment count and the duration. And that was actually the problem earlier is I said duration. It was actually calendar duration, which is yet another advantage of API Explorer is it saves you from yourself. And so you'll notice in the request, we sent an accept header of JSON. We sent a content type of JSON. This is actually a thing that just happened automatically because we're logged into this instance. It sent the X user token. So it's doing access control that way. And you'll notice here's all the response, including cache stuff and content type and all the kind of things that you get in any HTTP, including then a couple ServiceNow specific ones with these X's. And then here's what you see is the response body. So you get this payload, which is a result, which is the standard ServiceNow kind of top-level container of any response. And you see that we get the stats, and then each one of those stats is now a table, is an entry into this JSON object. So we have the average, and these are all the ones that I passed, average of the severity, reassignment count, etc. The min of duration, the max of duration, reassignment count, reopen count, etc., etc. So you can see all of that that's in there. Now, what you can do, one of the really nice aspects of this is, let's say you're integrating and this is the call you want, right? You've got something, you've got a script, and this is exactly the information that you want to get back out. And you're doing something else. We already have, in this nice little view here, we have a couple different ways where this will present you with the boilerplate code to just do that thing. If you're integrating from instance to instance, this will give you the ServiceNow syntax to do it. But let's say, my favorite, I still do this all the time, as I'm using curl from a bash script. If I wanted to do that, this is in fact what you would do to make that happen. And so we'll see actually when we do something a little more complicated, we'll actually see how you would do a post or something like that. But it really doesn't matter what the verb is. You always get that, and it could be Ruby. I was joking earlier about Perl. Compared to the fact like how much Perl we have done in our life, and frankly, if I was forced to do Perl, I would probably not be able to do it from scratch anymore. So having the boilerplate would be great. So nice and there you go. The Perl looks very Perly. So there's that. And let me get a little bit of a pause while I get ready for the next part. Is there any question we want to address at this point?
Dave, I am very pleased with the amount of questions coming in. I'm answering them as fast as they come in, and I feel like I'm still falling behind. This is great. We've never had this problem before, and it's a wonderful problem to have. I do have a couple of questions that have come in and some honorable mentions. Do table business rules run on table API inserts? And I answered that question already, but I'll reiterate it here. Yes, business rules run for all of the REST operations. So if you're creating a record and you've got a business rule that runs on insert for that table, it will run. Okay,
any operation on that table, right? I mean, not just REST.
It runs for all operations. It doesn't matter whether this record was created via REST, business rule will run. If the record was deleted, business rules will run. Whatever is appropriate. Just had one about security as well. What roles are required for the REST API? Whatever roles you use to authenticate, if you're logging in as Chuck.Tomasi via the UI, and then you will use that for a REST API, those same permissions apply. I don't have any more or any less access to the system. All the ACLs are honored. Everything else is honored. If I'm logging in, that's what I can do through the REST API, same as the UI. So it's the same level of access. You don't need to grant anybody a special role to do REST. If you have an account and you want to make it a little more secure, you can check the web services only checkbox on that user's profile in the sysuser table. That will limit them to just doing that. Someone said, I'm currently using the import set API to write records to ServiceNow. One drawback is that I must write one record at a time. How can I write batches of records to import sets? I don't have an answer for that immediately. Dave, do you?
Yeah, I don't have one to hand immediately. So that would be that can be a research question for that one. Okay,
we can definitely do a research. Yeah.
But here is to get to to put that in the REST API Explorer context is I don't really know how any of that works. But if you wanted to test out how it worked, this would be a way to do it. Let's say you're not sure if you could put multiple records in. You can actually come over here and you can pick your staging table on whatever you're going to do and say, what if I didn't want to write it? Let's just take the naive, try the thing that seems simple. What happens if I begin to pass multiple rows into it? And this actually gives you a way to test that out without a lot of setup. You can just get into a subprod like your developer instance and just try it. Right?
That's the beauty of the REST API Explorer. It lets you test things out before you actually start building. And then final quick question is the REST API Explorer an out-of-box feature, or is there an additional license? And the good news is it comes with the platform. It is free. You get it whether you want it or not, and you can use it on any platform. So it's been there since.
Yeah, it's right there. It will always be there.
Fuji, Geneva, Eureka, somewhere back there. I'm sure everybody's got it at this point.
Yeah. Yes, it's It's one of these take it for granted features because there is no, I don't believe there's an instance in the farm still running that doesn't have it. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to show you a similar thing to what we did now. This is one of the workshop applications. And as a part of this workshop, it creates a couple of resources. And in it, we have a few that this one is one that just gets the details of a poll. Okay, so I'm going to show you two different things that you can do. So to show it you working on not an out-of-box, we're going to switch over to the namespace. And this is, wrong namespace, I want XNC polls. So this is effectively the same as the scope that lives in. So if we switch over to the poll API, and we'll do V1, which is the only one that's exposed, we're going to retrieve poll detail. And so you'll see that this has one path parameter. And now one of the things about the difference between a path parameter and a query parameter is if you think about it, it's the difference between a required and a optional parameter. Because a path parameter, if you don't have this in here, it's actually not even the correct path, right? It actually ends one level of containment. It doesn't have enough levels in it to actually be matching as a path. So there must be a poll ID in here for this to even be a valid request. So in this case, I'm going to do the same thing Chuck did and have my handy text expander macro with a sys-ID of a poll that already exists on here. And so we're going to exercise this. This is now our built-in, and it's not a built-in, it's our built scripted REST API. And we're going to do the same kind of thing. We're going to do the send, and we get the response back. And so here's what the scripted REST API does. And I'm actually going off book of my own demo, which is usually the kiss of death. And I believe this one, because it uses the nice marshaled data structure, you see you can just switch it, and you get the same information back, but it's in XML. And so it's extremely easy to kind of do anything that you want with that. So let's go ahead and now do something a little more complicated, because everything we've done up to this now is a get verb. But a lot of the work of integrating, the real difficult work of integrating, involves the Payload Bearing API. I don't think I've ever said that phrase before. That's like, of the 5 verbs, 2 of them have payload, or 2 of them have no payload, the get and the delete, and then 3 of them have payload. So these are kind of they're the equivalent of like a load-bearing wall. They're a payload-bearing verb. So in this case, we can create a new poll. And when you do that, you have to post in the information of the poll that you want to create, and you need to do it. In a specific format. And so that's all in here. The code kind of knows all the stuff that it is getting. It'll parse out your JSON, and it will create the glide record based on that. So when you're doing these posts, you have 2 ways to go. You can do this builder, which gives you this nice interface where you can build out your payload basically 1 key value pair at a time. And I actually love this part of the interface where it has this nice, you don't expose it until you have both halves of it. You can kind of add this out. You can add another one, r equals foo. But the gentleman on the call here, what's the big weakness of trying to build them this way? What can't you do if you have a complex data structure?
Put an object within the object, or an array, or something of that nature.
Yeah.
Correct. Right. If your payload is just key values all at the top level of that JSON object, you can build them in this. But most APIs, require something more complex than that. And so in that case, what you would do is you come over to the raw builder. And in that case, you just put in the full payload that you want to create. So in this case, I have a pre-built payload ready to go. Where we have this containment, we have a questions key under which is an array, and each one of those things has a set of, a question and then a set of choices. And so we've got a couple different things in here. We'll go ahead and click send, and you'll notice as part of all this, the verb is post. You can't even change it, right? Once you pick the resource, that is what is going to happen. I'm going to click send. We will post that record. In any of those, anything that's not get, you actually get this pop-up from REST API Explorer. It will always warn you that you're modifying data and that you need to know that you're changing something on the system. So you get this kind of convenience, which, after a while, after the 100th time you see it, maybe is a little less convenient. But so now you see we get the similar view. We've got the headers that we sent in, and you'll notice we actually sent in fewer headers this time, right? Because a lot of that is in the body. That's the actual text of the body we sent in. And then, boop, 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 uh-oh. And we got an error. All right. So that is either is a problem on my payload or a problem on my REST API or something like that.
The joys of live demos.
Yes, live demos. And I'm not going to sweat that too hard. But what I will show is that even down here, you can get you can get the curl, and you'll notice this is much more complex than what we saw with the get, but it would still be working code, assuming that your underlying API works. So you like all the weird curlisms that I always have to look up, all those are already built for you. And so for the languages that we support, that's like a nice convenience. You get that.
It does come in handy.
Yes, I was just talking. Literally, one of my neighbors is a new customer, and works in the DevOps organization. And we were discussing how one of the things they have to do is, let's say they have an emergency reboot of a server. One of the things they have to do is file an emergency change request with that ticket. And I was saying how what you really should do is have the script that does all the stuff. It should also have in it a piece that just files your ticket for you. And he said, oh, well, how do you do that? And I said, you could just go to REST API Explorer and get your ticket right, just the way you want it, and then click that curl button, and it will give you the code, and then you cut and paste it. And in that situation, this is a thing that would help their business. And they've kind of been putting it off because it seemed big, but it is probably, I'm going to say probably like between 5 and 15 minutes work for this organization to get this really good bit of functionality in. And almost all that time is just sitting down with REST API Explorer, verifying that they've got everything working the way that they like it. And in that case, that might even, off the top of my head, I'm not even sure, it might even be one you could just build with the builder, right? Because they're just creating one record with a bunch of fields in it. So, like REST API Explorer is in a lot of work that you're trying to do should be your first port of call. Right? It's like a great place to begin when you're doing any kind of interaction with your ServiceNow API. So with that, I'm going to switch out of the demo, and while we do that, that's another good question answering point.
Well, brace yourself, Dave.
Whoa.
we got a lot of questions and answers in here, or questions in here.
Okay. Let's tackle a couple, and then we'll do the last few slides and let everyone get on with their day.
Did you have some, Chuck? There's so many, it's kind of hard. We'll have to follow up on some of them after the presentation. Maybe individually after the recording.
Okay.
But yeah, did you have some, Dave? Chuck?
I am going through them as quickly as I can. I have one. What is the difference between put and patch? They seem quite similar.
Let's defer that one because it's out of scope. Off the top of my head, I really don't remember. There is some minor difference. I don't actually remember what the nuance is. And patch, I think it has to do with the amount that you have to specify, but that's kind of shooting from the hip. Both of them. Oh, go ahead.
I always thought I need to look at it myself, but I'm just taking a stab here. I would think that patch was almost like doing you can update a record, only part of it or something. I don't know. It just kind of sounds. I don't know.
I think patch might be more incremental, but that's
what I'm reading. I just did a quick Google search and came up with a Stack Overflow. It says the existing HTTP put method only allows complete replacement of a document.
Yeah.
Patch is modifying an existing HTTP resource.
Yeah, both of them map to the update. If you think about CRUD, right?
Yep.
C is post. Well, the U is either patch or put, depending on how much of the record you want to send.
It's almost like doing an upsert.
Yeah. Okay. Another couple questions, and then we'll.
But you have 56 to choose from.
Okay. Well, either grab the best one or a couple at random, whichever seems more doable.
Oh, here's a random one. Can you please show how the security parameters are patched? Actually, did you show the code bit?
Did I show?
Where you get the script bits? I was busy answering questions. In the REST API Explorer, where you've got the JavaScript and the Perl and the curl.
Am I still sharing? I don't actually. I think I turned it off. But it does. That has in that boilerplate code. It gives you a default login, which isn't necessarily correct. It's where it says just admin, and that's where you would put credentials. Typically in curl, you might do that. You could also, although that's not in the boilerplate code, you could use an X user token, kind of the same way that the script user.
Yeah, you could do that in the header. There's also the availability if you're doing inbound integrations is what we're using REST API Explorer for. Your remote client, it's going to differ. It really is. You may be using OAuth, you may be using BASIC, you may be using none. So authentication really varies. But if you're doing outbound, that's a completely different story, and you'd be using the REST message v2 client, or excuse me, class, and you set your authentication differently that way. It really depends on who the consumer is and who the producer is. Who's got the stuff you need, that's the producer, and who's making the request to get it as the consumer.
And we will talk like one of the. Let me go ahead and go through.
We've got about 5 minutes left, Dave. So we probably want to wrap up, and then, like we said, we'll answer the rest of the questions offline.
So some of the ideas. Why would you use REST API Explorer? Because you can, as I said, you can use other tools. You can, and we'll talk about a few of those. And there's a role for all of these things in developing and maintaining an API. You want to use REST API Explorer kind of early in the development process, partly because it is endpoint aware, right? Like all the things that we saw as we were driving this around, it knows what tables you have, it knows what fields are in there. One of the big advantages when you're trying to get your code to work right is that it is in the same user session that you are logged in. So if you wanted to use JavaScript debugger on your scripted REST API, you can do that because you're running it in the same session. That is actually huge, that this REST API Explorer pairs with JavaScript debugger quite well. If you're doing an external API call, you can't do that because it's not running as you in your session. And as I said, it generates the code if you need the boilerplate. There are alternatives. Postman is one I use. I have also used PAW. And it's one of those things like editors, script editors. Everyone has an opinion and a different favorite. There are in-browser extensions like the Advanced REST Client and the increasingly misnamed SOAP UI, which does a lot of things that aren't SOAP. And we were joking that one day SOAP support might be removed from SOAP UI. But as we said, like post-put patches and deletes are not, you can't just easily generate them from a browser, so you need something. And so you might want to use the alternatives sometimes because you may have gotten to the point where you're fairly good with your logic, you feel secure in how the API is operating. Now you need to actually test it as an external, not sharing the same session user would experience it. Like all the authentication stuff we were just talking about, does it actually work properly? Well, in order to test that, you actually can't use a REST API Explorer, right? You want to make sure that that's coming from offboard. So you want to make sure that all the authentication and the routing and all those kinds of things. You may want it coming from outside the network or something like that, and you need an off instance tool. And it depends a little bit on the capabilities of the tool. Like in that workshop that I was referencing earlier, we use Postman, and Postman actually has some nice post testing where you can specify assertions on the payload or the headers or something like that. So you can set up basically like unit tests for your API in Postman, and you may need that, right? And so you can do all these things simultaneously. They're not mutually exclusive. They kind of take on different importances at different stages of the development lifecycle. So takeaways: REST API Explorer is a solid tool. It's kind of a first-level citizen of your ServiceNow development world. It speeds up developing and maintaining APIs. It helps in integrating, right? As I was talking about in the table, creating the change request. You can, or the import set. You can use this to see what happens when you make a request. It is built in. It exists in the same instance you're already using. It has no license fee. It has no plugin that needs to be activated. It's already there. And so with that, here is some of the reference information. This is in the reference, the resource widget. We're new to this platform, so I don't know all the lingo, but the resource widget has the links to this. And you've got the TechNow short link, with takes you to information about this show specifically. We've also got a survey because we're addressing kind of a different audience, a much broader audience than we've had on different tools. So we want to know kind of where people are coming to us from, a little about them, and really what kind of your needs as a developer-centric audience, and what can we do in the future to help serve you better. All right, gentlemen, any final thoughts?
No, I think that the REST Explorer is a great tool, just like you mentioned, to be able to troubleshoot things, at least from the ServiceNow point of view. But yeah.
I use it all the time, especially when doing scripted REST APIs, and I want to make sure that my payload is working and my script is working. And it's very easy just to hit that Explorer button, and you're running with the right parameters already engaged. It's so fast and easy.
The Explorer and the script debugger are like two great tastes that taste great together. They're just
We're doing script debugger in July. See if I can throw that teaser out there.
All right. And so with that, thank you for joining us. And thanks, everybody, for spending an hour talking about this stuff. This is literally all three of us on the call is what we do. We love to talk about this stuff. So you can follow us on the community. You can email any questions, Twitter, Facebook, and you can reach out to all of us. We are all extremely Googleable in these ServiceNow contexts. So if you try to find us, it's almost impossible that you don't. So, all right. Thanks, everybody.